Hello, my name is Dr. Thomas Fernandez, and I'm retired from teaching computer science. And one of my favorite classes was one that where we learned some graphics programming and particularly creating computer art. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you the introductory class to computer art, and we're going to be using C#, and we're going to be using Windows Forms. Now, Windows Forms is not the most modern interface, but it's the one I usually start with when I'm teaching this class. It's fairly easy to get into, but I'm going to take you through it step by step. Okay, so here we go. You don't need to see me, you're going to see the screen, and I'm going to start Visual Studio. I'm running Visual Studio 2022, which is the Community Edition. You can find plenty of tutorials on how to install it. We're going to start a new project. And when you start a new project, you have a number of different options on what type of project you want to make. And you'll see them on this list here. And what we're looking for is a Windows Forms app in C#, Windows, and desktop. And so we're going to select that as our app type. And as soon as we've selected that, we'll just go to next. And here I'm going to call this WF tutorial 000. Maybe I should make that a lowercase t. So Windows Forms tutorial 000. I'm going to put it in a folder. Now you can use the defaults if you want, but I'm just going to put it in, I'm going to create a new folder for Windows Forms tutorial 000. Okay, and then I will select that folder. Okay, so I've selected that folder, so I've decided on the folder to put it in. I'm going to create a new solution. The solution name will be WF tutorial 000. I am not going to check this box. I'm going to put the solution and the project in, not put them in the same directory, and then I'm going to click next. And here I can choose the different frameworks. It doesn't really matter. You might want to use Net 8.0. Long-term support means it should be around for a while, but I'm going to use Net 9.0 standard term support, and then I'm going to click create. Nothing about this is so fancy that the version of .NET is going to make any difference. Okay, now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here and change this from debug to release, and we're going to change it from any CPU. Okay, we need to make it work for I'm going to make it work for 64-bit Intel or AMD type processors. So I will go here to the configuration manager, and I don't get this because they've got these little tiny screens, but you gotta pick X64 in this little pull down, and don't know what's going on with my printer, but I'm going to do this little active solution platform. I'm going to say new, and then I'm going to pull down this menu. It's really tiny. I don't know why it's so tiny. And then I'm going to pick X64, and I'm going to copy the settings from any CPU and click OK. So now I'm all set, and I can close this little window. And now you'll see up here it says X64. Now, when you start a new project, a new Windows Forms project, desktop project, you will get a screen that looks like this. And this is a window. And it's actually built the basics of the program. And at this point, if I press Control F5, or if I go to Project, if I go to Debug and click Start Without Debugging, now notice I could have just pressed Control F5, but here you can see this is another way of doing it. If I say Start Without Debugging, it will compile this program and run it. And this is the program right here. Now it doesn't do anything. It's just an empty window. Does a few things. You can maximize it. You can restore it. You can minimize it, in which case it'll go down here to the taskbar. And essentially you can also close it. There are some other operations here. You can size it, minimize it, maximize it, but close it is all we need to do right now. Now notice this is not an application. This is a picture of your application. And here you can see that the entire window is highlighted. And if we go over here and click Properties, we will get a list of properties for the application, and you can either cluster them by the types. So here we'll make a few changes to the properties of this window. We'll start by making the back color. We can change the back color, and you have three options. You can take system colors, which are all very nice, but and if you want to standardize your application, you should pick the right system colors, but I'm just going to pick a light blue here. So now it's got a light blue black background. And if I go over here to the toolbox, now if you don't see the toolbox, you can go up here to View, and somewhere here will be Tool, not Toolbar, but Toolbox. Somewhere. So Toolbox. Other windows, maybe? Other windows. Toolbox. Okay, so I usually leave it open, but I closed it just because. Here we go. Toolbox. Now you can press Control Alt X, or it's easier just to click on Toolbox. Now right now it's covering up the part of the screen. Now if I take this little pin up here and change it to pin it to the screen, then it'll move it over and move this window over so we can see this. Now, here we look under Common Controls. If it's not highlighted, you can just click the little arrow next to it. And here we're going to click Button. And then we're going to go over here and add a button. Okay, so now we've added a button to the application, and you can see that it's highlighted. So if I go over here to the Properties window, I'm getting the properties of the button, and I can change its back color, and I can make it a I can make it I'll make it red. Okay, now of course the font doesn't show up very clearly, so if I go over here to the font, let's see, name says okay, I think it's 4-color. So let me change this to an alphabetical list, and now I should be able to find 4-color. Okay, 4-color. I will change the 4-color again. I'll pick a custom color. I'll make it a light yellow. That'll make it more readable. Now I'll go back to the category classifications, and I'll go over here to font, and I'll change the font. And this will make it even more readable. I'll make a block font, and I'll make it real big, and I'll click OK. Now you see that the text in here says button 1. So if we look here at the text, again, I will change it to an alphabetical because I know that the thing I'm looking for is text, and I will change it from button 1 to do it. So now we have a button in the form with the text says do it, and now if we press Control F5, or if we go to debug and say start without debugging, we can see that the program runs, and it has a button, and you can't really see anything because the button doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead and close this, and let's make the button do something. Okay, so in order to make the button do something, we'll go here to Properties again, and this time we will go to Events, and the event that we're looking for this button will be the click event. So we will just double click on this space next to click event. See, click here, and double click here, and now it takes us into the code. Now this is called the designer. This is where you design the window, and this is the code for the same designer. This, by the way, this window is called Form 1. And what we've done is we've added a little function here, and this function will be called when the button is clicked. So you don't call it from code, but you call it when an event occurs, and the event that it has to occur for this to be called is for the button to be clicked. So here we will just say back color equals, and we won't make it white. Let's change it to let me move the semicolon back over here. I'm sorry, the close curly brackets, and we'll make it the color green. and put a semicolon at the end of the line. Okay, now when the button is clicked, the background color of the window is going to change to green. So let's go ahead and run that. And now when we click on the button, the background turns green. Now, if we click on it again, it'll just stay green. So let's try something else. Let's add a random number generator. I say the most interesting art programs usually use a random number generator. So we will just declare random, and I will call it rand just because that's what I usually call it. And it's a dynamic object, so at this point, I mean, there's no pointers in C#, or at least you don't have to deal with pointers, but everything is a pointer. So I have to say equals new random. Actually, not everything is a pointer. Some basic types like integers are just integers. But in any case, I've created a random number generator here. And so instead of just turning it green, I'm going to turn it to a random color. Now, I could put the whole code here for making it a random color, but instead, I try to keep my code very simple. So if there's any complexity in the code, I try to push it down into another function. And the name of the function that I'm going to use is get random color. And that's going to return a color. And I'm going to say semicolon. And notice that I haven't written this code yet. But also notice how very readable this is. When button 1 is clicked, the back color is going to be equal to a random color. So now, if we go over here, there is a problem. If we try to compile this, it's going to complain that get random color does not exist. So we have to write that. So let's go ahead and generate a method. Oh, I should explain. If you have a problem, it'll create this little light bulb thing over here. And then you can select the different options that you can use. And here we're going to say generate a method for get random color. So we do that. And it right below here in the code, it's created the function for get random color. Now right now it's going to throw a not implemented exception. So we don't want it to do that. So we'll just erase that. And we're going to have it return a random color. Now color is kind of a strange object, but I can return a color and I can get it from the I can get it from the red, green, blue components that I want to add. And each of those components is a value between 0 and 255. But I want to get a random number between 0 and 255. So instead of having 255 there, I'm going to say rand.next, and this is how you get the next random number. And that's a function, and it takes an argument, and the argument is it's the upper bound of the random number that you want. And so here it'll actually give me a random number between 0 and 1 less than this number. So it'll give me a random number between 0 and 255. And I want to do that for the red, green, and the blue. And so I will take all this junk out. So now I've got a function called getRandomColor that will return a random color using the random number generator that I created up here, and it will give me a random value for red, a random value for blue, and a random value for green. Okay, so now let's run this program. Okay, now when I click do it, it makes a random color. Now I think it's just a coincidence that it was green again. Let's click it again. Okay, this time it's pink, and now purple and a yellow and a gray and green, and so every time I click this button, it's giving me another random color. Okay, so that's good. So now we've got a program that takes an input. It's just clicking on a button called do it, and it changes the background color of the window. Okay, so that's no big deal. But anyway, it does what it does. Now, we wanted to do something else. We wanted to open another window where we can create some artwork. And so let's go ahead and go up here to Project, and we're going to say add another form, because we're going to add another form, and we'll call this one, it defaults to form 2, but we're going to call this one the art form. And so we're adding a new form. Okay, and there it is. Now, we can do anything we want with it. We're not going to do much with it, but we will make it a little bigger. And that's all it does right now. And let's go back to form 1 and go back to this function button 1 click, and we're going to have it not only change the back color, but we're going to have it create an art form. Okay, so all we have to do is we have to say art form. That's the name of the type, and we're going to call the variable. Actually, we'll just use the defaults that it says here. We'll call the variable art form, and we're going to create a new art form, because again, in C#, most objects are really just underneath. They're just a pointer or a type of reference to the object, and you have to create it using the new operator. So we're going to say a new art form. Okay, now we have to do more than that. We have to say artform.show, because just creating it doesn't make it display on the screen. You have to call, it has a method called show, and that will display it on the screen. So now let's run our application again. Okay, we've got our form 1, and we click do it, and it creates this form, art form, and that's where we're going to draw some art. Okay, I'm going to close this again, and now we'll go to art form, and we're going to click on view code. Remember, there's always the designer where you can draw things, make the window bigger, do whatever you want with it that's sort of visually. But then when you click view code, this is the actual code that makes the art form. Okay, now it's going to get a little complicated. So we're not going to actually draw the art in the window. we are going to draw the art in a bitmap. And so we're going to let me just check my notes. Yes, we're going to create a bitmap, and we're going to put it in the artform class, and we're just going to say bitmap and we're going to call the bitmap BMP. And that's all we're going to do. Now, this function here called artform with no parameters and no return value is the constructor for the artform. And so this will automatically be called when we create a new artform. So in here, we're going to create the actual bitmap. Remember, BMP is not a bitmap. It's almost really just a pointer to a bitmap. So let's make it actually be a bitmap by saying new and bitmap. Now, there are 12 different sets of arguments that we could use for a bitmap. If we had another image, we could use that. If we had a stream, we could, I guess, read it from a file or from any stream. If we had a file name, we could just give it a file name and it would go read the bitmap. So if you had a picture of something, or you could change the size. But we're going to use this one. We're going to use the parameters number 5. We're going to give it a width and a height as integers. And we'll go ahead and declare those variables up here. And I'm just going to call the variable, it is going to be an integer, and I'm going to call it bwidth. And I'm going to set it equal to, I'll just make it 400 for now. Let's make it 600, a little bigger. 600. And we're going to have and it's already suggested, it knows how I like to code. So it's going to say the b height is equal to 600. I think we'll make it a little bit rectangular. So I'll make the height of the bitmap 400 pixels, and I'll make the width 600 pixels. And we'll make this bigger later, but for now that'll do. And here in the constructor, we will simply give it the bwidth and the b height as the two arguments to the constructor. Now we need something else. We need a graphics. So now graphics is actually the handle that you use to do drawings in a bitmap or in a window. So I'm going to just call this the graphics for the bitmap. So G bitmap and semicolon. And after I've created the bitmap, now I'm going to create the graphics for it. And it did this whole thing for me. So it's saying that the graphics, it's sort of like it's a class. Graphics is a class that has a lot of graphic functions in it. And it has to be set up with either a window or with a bitmap. In this case, we're going to set it up with a bitmap. And so the G bitmap equals the graphics from the image. And that sets up our ability to do graphics in the image. And now we're going to have to deal with an interesting subject. What did I do? Control Z. What happened to my code? Oh well, I'll put it back. G bitmap. Oh, I erased it from here. Kind of weird. Okay, so G bitmap semicolon. So this is the graphics class for doing things in our bitmap. So now I'll just say, and now it's put in the code. So now this graphics thing is associated with the bitmap. And so when I use G bitmap to do drawing, it'll end up in the bitmap. Okay, so now we need to create a thread, because we want this thing to sort of draw continuously. This particular example is going to be, it's not going to be a static picture, it's going to be sort of a continuous animation. So I'm going to say thread, and I'm going to call it the worker, because it's going to do all the work of creating the art. And I'll set it equal to a new thread. And yeah, it's trying to do some stuff here, but I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm just going to say that it's a new thread. And now I'm going to get my glasses so I can read my notes. And I will also turn on the lights. Thank you for your patience. You know, I've looked at my notes and I've decided to call this the drawing thread. And I've also decided not to make it a local variable here. I'm going to make it a class variable up here. And so down here I will not declare it. If I declare it, I would have a local variable with the same name, and that would make this whole thing a little bit confusing. Now, I am going to make the drawing thread. Oh, the arguments to the thread are going to be 2. Well, there's actually, again, there's I think 4 different parameter sets that I can use in the new thread. So they're listed here. I can just have the name of a function where it'll start. I can have a function with no arguments where it'll start. And I can have the name of a function that has an argument, and also I can set the maximum stack size, and I'm going to use that. So I'm just going to say that there's going to be a function called start, and I'm going to make the stack size, what is that, 200,000? I'll make it 2 million. So I'm going to give it 2 million bytes. And that way later when we create recursive art, that'll give it a big stack. So when you do recursion, you need a bigger stack. And some of the most interesting artwork on the computer is done with recursion. So I will just do that. Now, this means that I have to create a function here called start. So let me go ahead and put that in. And I'm just going to call it I don't want to call it start. I've looked at my notes and I want to call it draw. Because after we create this framework, all you're going to have to do is change the function draw and it'll create a different artwork. So for now, I will create this function draw. I will have it return a void, and the name of it is draw. And I'm going to make it a parameterized function in case I want to pass it a parameter. I will just call it an object, and I'll call it the param. So that'll be the thing. Now, in C#, object is the base class for every class. So essentially, I could send it anything I want as a parameter, and that's how the draw class. Now this is where I'm going to actually draw something. So I will be drawing to the bitmap. So when I draw something, there's two ways you can draw something in a window or a bitmap. You can draw something with lines, or you could draw something with solid areas of color. Now, if you draw something with lines, you will need something called a pen. And I'll declare a pen object, and I'll just hang on. And I will create a new pen, and the arguments for the pen are a color. So I will say color red, and the width of the pen. Now I'm just going to say 4. So that'll give me a pen that's colored red and is 4 pixels wide. And now I am going to take that G bitmap. This was the thing that allows me to draw into the bitmap, and I'm going to call draw ellipse dot draw ellipse. Now, the first thing it's going to need is a pen. So I would give it the pen. Then there's 4 different arguments, but I'll just give it a rectangle. So I'll just say rectangle. Now, I want to make a random rectangle, so I'll just say rectangle. And actually, I can make this a rectangle F. Now, rectangle F means that it's made of 4 floating point numbers. So rectangle F, I'll just call it rect, equals, and rectangle F, open parentheses, And now it wants an x. Well, again, there's 4 different ways of doing it, but essentially you give it the x and y coordinates of your upper left hand corner of the rectangle, and I'm going to want to use a random number for that. So now we get into something. Before I do anything more with the rectangle, what I'd like to do, because I want to use the random number generator, and I created a random number generator here, and I've also got a function called getRandomColor, and I'll want to use that as well. So I'm going to want to make these functions and the random number generator, I'm going to want to make them global. And so I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to say add class, and I'm just going to abbreviate it to G. G for global. And this makes writing the syntax in the code easier. And this is not something you have to do. You can name it whatever you want. If you want to name it the global class that I like to use, that's fine, but then you'll have to type that a lot. So I just call it G. So I've created a new class called G, and I'm going to move the random number, well, hang on a second. I'm going to move the random number into the G class. So I'll put it over here in G. And I'm going to also move this random color thing over into the G class. Let's Control X and put it in the G class. So now I've got 2 things. I've got a random number object and also a function called getRandomColor. Now we got to do a few things here. We've got to make these things, well, I think the easiest thing at this point is just to call it public. So we're going to make the class public. We're also going to make all these variables public, or any variable that's in here that we want to have access to from everywhere, we're going to call it public. This function here, instead of calling it private, I'm going to call it public. And I'm also going to call it static, because I want to be able to use it without having to create a G class. The G class is just a container that will hold all my global stuff, and so it's a way of organizing it. And as you build useful functions, you can put them in this G class. That way you can include them in other programs, and we're just going to be putting functions in here that are useful for creating artwork, particularly in Windows Forms. So anyway, so now I've got this function getRandomColor, but I want another function, and it's going to be getRandomRectangle. So actually, let me do that here. I'm going to go back to Artform, and I'm just going to say that the rectangle F is equal to, now that it's going to be in G, I have to put a G period in front of these functions. So I'm going to say get rand rect, and I'll call it get rand rect, just in case there's, for some reason, I need an integer version at some point. And I'm going to give it the argument of b width and b height, because that's where I want the rectangle to be. I want it to be somewhere in the within the bitmap that I've created. I want a rectangle that fits entirely in the. Okay, now there is a problem with this. Oh, if we compile this, let's compile it. We're going to have a bunch of errors at this point. So one, it says that G does not contain a definition for randef. I'll get to that. Here it says a semicolon is expected. So I'll go ahead and add a semicolon. It's my favorite error, easiest to fix. And here I need a semicolon here as well. Okay, so, and then it says get random color does not exist in the current context. Let's go look at that. We moved this get random color out of the form class into G, so all I have to do is put a G period in front of it so it knows where to look for it. And then I've got this thing here. Now, this is a little thing. I just need to put a question mark in front of on the edge of the object. That means that it could be just a null value. Now, null is a special value. It means that something doesn't exist, or that it's a pointer that's not yet assigned. Okay, so that fixes all of that, and we're down to this one error, that G does not contain a definition for getRandef. So now, if we go to this line, over here we get that little light bulb thing, and it'll generate a method for getRandef. So now it's generated, but notice it's not going to be here because it knows that it's supposed to be over in the G class. Now, if we press F12, that'll jump us right to it. And right now the code just says to throw a not implemented exception because we haven't written it yet. So we can take that out. And now we need it to return a random rectangle. So let's just create, you know what, I think I'm going to change this to be just an integer rectangle for now because that'll make things easier. So I'll take the little f off, which means that it's a rectangle that's defined by integers. Let me go back to art form, and here instead of the f, I'm going to take that off, and then I'll take the f off of here, and so it's going to be simpler to code it just using integers. And so if I go back to G, now I'm going to return just a regular rectangle. So I will return a new rectangle with, okay, so now I'm going to say, you know what, let me create some variables here just to keep it simple. So I'm just going to say int x1 equals, and I'll just say rand of b width. So it'll be a random number somewhere between 0 and b width minus 1, which is where I want the upper left hand corner of the rectangle to be. And then int y1 is going to be equal to the rand of b height. Okay, now I'm going to now specify the lower right hand corner. So essentially I'm going to just do these two lines again, but I'm going to call it x2 and y2. So I'll just change this to a 2. So now I have 4 random numbers. x1, y1, x2, y2, and those represent 4 points. And so now I can create a new rectangle. There's a bunch of different arguments for this. Let's take a look at them. We'll use the last one. So it wants the xy coordinates of the upper left-hand corner, and it also wants the width and the height. So I'm just going to say x1, comma, y1, and then I'm going to say comma. Okay, now x2 and y2 are points, or they're just numbers that mark the bottom right-hand corner. So the actual width is going to be x2 minus x1, and the height is going to be y2 minus y1. Now, if it turns out that x2 and y2 are bigger than x1 and y1, then it'll give it a negative height and width, and so in that case, x1 and y1 won't specify the upper left-hand corner, but if these were both negative, it would specify the lower right-hand corner, and then the height and width would be negative, which means it moves up from there. So anyway, so that's what this function is going to return. So it's going to return a rectangle with these random coordinates that'll all be within b width and b height, which are passed in, and so this will give me a random rectangle. If I go back now to the art form, I can see that I have a rectangle and a pen, and now I can do the gbitmap dot draw ellipse pen comma rectangle. Maybe to make it simpler, instead of drawing an ellipse, I will draw a rectangle. So I will draw a rectangle instead of an ellipse. And let's see, what else is this? This I need to call. Rand is not a function, it's an object which has a function called next that I have to call here instead of just the function. So Control C, Control V. Could have done this easier, but this will work fine. Control V. So now if we look down here in the error list, we have 0 errors and 0 warnings, and we can run the program. And if we click do it, well, we don't see anything because we haven't been drawing in the window, we've been drawing in the bitmap. So now we have to put the bitmap into the window, so we'll do that now. So now is another little tricky thing, and the tricky thing is that when you have a bitmap and you want to put it in a window, you have to draw it there. Now every form has a function. Let's go back to the designer, and just like the button had an event, let me go to properties. Just like it was a little weird. There we go. So the properties also has an event, and I'm going to do the alphabetic list because I know the name of the event that I want to do. It's called paint. So I want an event. Now the operating system is actually what decides when an object needs to be painted. Actually, there's a way you can force it, and we're going to do that. But normally the operating system decides when something needs to be painted, and every form needs to have a paint function. Now, I have a paint function already figured out, and all I want to do when this object needs to be drawn is to put the bitmap in the paint function. So here we're in the paint function. I think I've got it in my clipboard from my notes earlier. So let me just take a look and see if I can find it. No, I rebooted the computer, so I don't have that. But let me, okay. So remember that you need to have a graphics thing when you and it's providing my code for me, so it's doing auto completion. So this function paint, when it gets called, it's going to get an object called E that is the paint event args, and in that is the e.graphics. So I'm creating a variable called G, and I'm going to just say G. Let me get my glasses on again so I can read my notes. I'm going to say okay. So I'm going to say G dot draw image, and it's going to be the image that I'm going to draw is the bitmap. Now there's 32 different sets of arguments for this, so I guess this one would work. Here, draw image, the bitmap, and the upper left hand corner of where I want it to draw, and I'm just going to say 0, 0. So that'll put it up in the upper left hand corner. Just for reference, the upper left hand corner, the upper leftmost pixel in a window or in a bitmap is 0, 0, and then the x's increase as they move to the right, and the y's increase as you go down. So it's a little bit backwards. It has to do with the way television sets used to work, but I'm not going to digress on that. I think we can run this now. Okay, and we'll click do it. Okay, now we're still not seeing anything because we somehow need to force the operating system to call the paint function. So if I go down here, move the screen off the window, and then move it up, that didn't work. Let me try something else. In the draw function, the last thing I can do is say invalidate. And what invalidate does is it tells the operating system that the window needs to be redrawn. And after the operating system is told that the window needs to be drawn, the operating system then will call the paint function for that window. And so let's see what happens. Let me do something else. This is, we're doing this live here, and that's the way programming works. Things don't always work exactly the way you want it to. So I'm going to make this a different function. I'm going to make this a floating point 0 and a floating point 0. And here I'm going to say display rectangle dot width. And that's an integer, but I'm going to make it into a float as well. So let me just put a cast to a float. Not sure I need that, but I know it'll work. Or I hope it'll work. Comma. And also again, float display rectangle dot height. And what this will do is it should scale everything so that the bitmap image, okay, I know why it didn't work. See, I created the drawing thread here, and now I need to start the drawing thread. So just creating the thread doesn't actually run the thread, but if you call start, then the thread will run, and it's a separate thread, so it doesn't tie up the rest of the program. You can still click on buttons and stuff, and it'll start the thread, and the thread will go to the draw function. Let me see if that works. Still doesn't work. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. Okay. Okay, so we're going to change this from release mode to debug mode, and I'm going to put a breakpoint right here to see if the draw function is ever actually starts. So now, instead of pressing Control F5, which would start without debugging, now I'm going to start with debugging. So I will just press F5 or click on this menu option. Okay, now I click do it, and it did come here. And so now I can single step through this operation, but I still don't see the rectangle. So I did color the pen red, and I did get a random rectangle, I think. And let's make sure that somehow this is being executed as well. So now I'm going to take Shift F5, which will close the program. Now I'll run F5 again, and I'll click do it. It does get to that point. Now I'll press F5. Does get to the drawing point too. So now I'll press F5 again. Ha! So now the rectangle is there. That's what we wanted, and I'm wondering why it doesn't appear why it didn't appear before. So let me do a Shift F5, close out the debugging. Let me go back to the release mode and run this. So do it. I don't know what's going on here, so let me... Now, I'm going to close it, go back to debug mode. It's weird when a program only runs in debug mode, but let's see how this works. Do it. Okay, I'm going to press F5 to continue, F5 to continue, and now it's drawing a rectangle. Okay. Well, that's what I wanted it to do, but I don't understand why it doesn't do it when it's in release mode. By the way, when you write a program, you use debug mode to figure out what's wrong, and then you use release mode when you want to run it for some purpose, or if you want to give it to a customer so that they can have it. And the release mode runs much faster. The debug mode is slower because it's got to include all that code, so it'll stop at the breakpoints and let you step through it one line at a time. Okay, so this is what programming is all about. It's like figuring out why things don't work. In fact, I think I'm going to stay in debug mode. And let me do a Control F5, which will run it, but okay, that looks good. Okay, so sometimes it creates a rectangle and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run it in debug mode. So I'm just going to press F5 and click do it. And now the program has stopped at this point, which allows us to single step through the program. So let's do F10, and I'm going to do F10 again. Now what F10 does is it runs just one line of code. So I run F10 again, and now let's take a look at the rectangle it created. Is it 501 and 242? And the width is minus 62 and minus 176. So this XY is the lower right hand corner, and then it goes up for 62 pixels and over for 172. Okay, so now I'm just going to run it, and it does not show up. Draw a rectangle, pen and rect. Let me look here. So it was 600 and 400 was the bitmap, and I did create the bitmap, and I got the G-pen, and it works sometimes. Let's run this again. I have to stop the debugging with a Shift F5. I'm going to do Control F5. The code is still in debug mode, but I'm not running it in debug. And do it. No rectangles. No rectangles. Ha! A rectangle. So sometimes it works. There we got a rectangle again. Let me just see something here. If I say do it, there's no rectangle. If I expand this to full screen, there's still no rectangle. Okay, well, this might be where I stop the video and figure out what's wrong on my own. But I usually don't mind people watching me debug something. Makes me look a little bit dumb, but that's okay. So let's see, we get here. Let me debug this again. Click do it. So now it's stopped at this breakpoint, and I've got a pen. Doesn't exist now, but let me run that one line. Now the pen is colored red, and I'm gonna move this over a little to get a little more room for it. The pen is colored red, let me just see something here. I'm going to break out of this. See the constructor. Maybe this has to be a floating point number. No, that didn't do it. Let me look down here at the paint routine. Display rectangle width and display rectangle height. You know what? I'm going to change this. I'm going to take this line out. 2 slashes will make it a comment. And I will just say rectangle. I'm going to put the object rect equals new rectangle, and I'm just going to put it at 100, comma 100, and I'm going to make it 50 by 50. So instead of calling that function to get the rectangle, I will set it equal to that value and see what happens. Okay, so that looks good. So we're getting a rectangle here. So I'm thinking that perhaps the getRandRect has some problem. So tell you what, my wife's just come in with some groceries, and I'm going to help her. Fix that, and then I will come back and let's see. How do I pause the recording? Okay, I'm back, and we had a problem with getting the rectangle from this function called getRandRect, and if we just specify the rectangle, it seemed to work. Let's test it again. Okay, so it worked there, and it works again and again and again. So it's pretty consistent that it works when I specify the rectangle. So I think I'll comment out this line, and we'll go take a look at this code here and see what it's doing. So this get rand rect is taking b width and b height as its arguments. If I press F12, it'll jump me to that function. So let's see what it's going on here. So x1 is getting a random number between 0 and b width. X2 is getting a random number between 0 and b width. Y1 is getting a number between 0 and b height. Then the width is going to be, the rectangle is going to have x and y as the upper left-hand corner, assuming that width and height is positive. Otherwise, it could be any one of the corners. And then x2 minus x1. I tell you what, we're going to set a breakpoint right here. Well, first I'll clear all the other breakpoints. So I say delete all breakpoints, and I'll say yes. And then I'll set a breakpoint right here, and we can watch what happens to those variables when the function is called. So let's do F5. We're still in debug mode. So I'll click do it, and it stops at this breakpoint. And you can see the variables down here. So I'll execute these line by line. So x1 is 207. Y1, okay, let me, so this is auto, so it's only showing variables that are close to where I was. So x1 we already said was okay. Y1 seems okay. X2 is 485. So that's okay. And Y2 is 344. So that means x1 is 207. By the way, if I just put the cursor on top of a variable, it'll tell me what the values are. So this is going from 207 to 223, and x2 is 485 minus x1 is 207. Those will be 200 something. And y3 is 344, and y1. So let's go ahead and run that, F5. Okay, so now I'm getting the rectangle again. So let me bring do it up and click it again. Okay, and I'm just going to let it run from here. Okay, this time I didn't get anything. So this is one of the problems when you use random numbers in a program. It makes it a little harder to debug. So I'm going to start the program over. Press F5. Now, I'm using these expressions here, but sometimes it's easier to debug things. I'll go ahead and close this. It's easier to debug things if I put in variables. So I'm going to say int, because that way you can examine these sort of intermediate values. Int width equals, it thinks the width is going to be x1 minus x2. X2 would be the bigger, usually. So x2 minus x1 Okay. And the height is y2 minus y1. Okay. It figures out that's what I want. And then I'm going to say rectangle, and I'm going to call it rect equals new rectangle x1 y1 width and height. That all looks good. Now because I've added these extra lines, at this point I will just return the rect. And because I've added these extra lines, it's really doing the same work. And by the way, it's not going to be any faster or slower, because the compiler will have optimized all that out. So let me just press F5 and run this. Okay. So I'll click on do it, and I'm here, and x1 is equal to 497, x2 is equal to, y1 is equal to 189, x2 is equal to 568, y2 is equal to, let me scroll down a bit, and now the width is equal to 71. Let's see, x1 was 497, x1 is 497, and x2 is 568, so that looks right. And now the height is 101, so again, y1 was 189, and y2 is 290, so yes, the height's going to be 101. So now it's going to create the rectangle of x1. Now let's take a look at the rectangle. 497, 189, height 71, width 71, height 101. All looks good. I don't understand this. So now I'm just going to let it run, and I get the rectangle. So now I'm going to run it again without debugging. Shift F5, Control F5, do it. Okay, so did I mention that programming is 4 hours of frustration followed by 4 minutes of elation? Go back to Artform here. Still seems to be somehow related to this. Okay. So this always works. But if I call that function, let me see if there's, it may not allow a negative height and width. Oh, I need to close the program. before I can rebuild it. So let me just see here. I did this with floating point rectangles previously. Okay, if it doesn't allow negative height or width, then it's going to fail 3/4 of the time. Let's just see what happens. See if we can experimentally determine 3. Well, that's the fourth one. So right now it is working 25% of the time. 1. Whoops. Let me go back to okay, didn't work. Didn't work. Didn't work. Did work. Okay. So yeah, it's roughly working about 1/4 of the time, and I think that confirms my theory. Okay. So, okay. What that means is that if I go back to G, if x1 is greater than x2, I have to swap them. So if x1 is greater than x2, so I got to swap them. So int temp equals x1 semicolon x1 equals it had it right, x1 equals x2 and x2 equals temp. Okay, so that'll swap x1 and x2. With the floating point number rectangles, it didn't seem to care if the heights and widths were negative. So now I just have to change all these to y's. And I'm sure there's an easier way to do this, but this is not going to be too bad. Okay, so if my theory is correct, then it should work every time now. Okay, that's a good start. That's also a good start. Okay, so apparently when you have the constructor for the rectangle, it requires that the width and height always be positive. So that's fine. Now, this would be an example of where you should document things. So I could just say height and width must be positive. Wish I could spell. Height and width must be positive. So x1 and y1 might have to be switched. So this will help me if I have to come back here later, and I'll just put it also y1 and y2. Okay, well, we've got our basic framework. In other words, when we run the program, we click do it, it creates a window, and the draw function in the art form is what will, and I'll take this line out because we don't need it anymore. The draw function will draw in the bitmap, and then it'll display it in the window. Now, I know this is not an exciting drawing, but I'm thinking that this has gone on long enough, especially because of the bug I had, and I think that it was a good class because it demonstrated how to fix bugs, which is a big part of programming. You have to be patient. Coding is 4 hours of frustration. I think it was a little less than 4 hours today, followed by 4 minutes of elation. Just to give you an idea of where the artwork could go, just to make this like a bit of an artwork, I can just, instead of doing this once, I can say int I equals 0. I don't like the way it finished this out. In other words, what I'm going to do here, instead of drawing one rectangle, I'm going to draw 2,000 rectangles. And instead of making them all red, I'm going to, I'm not sure I like that invalidate inside that loop. That's a lot of work for the computer, but what the heck. And instead of making the color red, I'm going to use that function we had, g.get random color. So now instead of drawing one rectangle, it's going to draw 2,000. Let me cut this back to 200, and let's see what happens here. Okay, so I don't know if you've been in modern museums. You may have seen artwork like this. By the way, the way I did the draw image thing here, this draw image thing, these two extra parameters will scale it to the display height and width. So if I maximize it, a little weird here, it left this behind, but that's okay. But it does scale, so if you maximize this window, and we'll be fixing these other things later. It still has the old image. This is still there. I've been to art museums where I've seen less artistic art than this. This is not my favorite stuff, but at least what we've done is we've set up a framework so that if we take this code and we change what's in the draw routine, we can get whatever kind of artwork we want. For example, if instead of draw rectangle, we said draw ellipse. Now what the ellipse function does, it takes the same exact arguments as the draw rectangle, but it'll draw an ellipse that's within the bounding box of the defined rectangle. So let's run this. Okay, so there it is. Instead of random rectangles, we're getting random ellipses. So I'm going to call this a wrap, and I am going to create another video where I'm going to get into more detail and do more interesting things in the draw function. I may do some other modifications to some of this other code as well. But I'm going to leave that for another video. I think we've covered enough stuff for now. I will somehow make this code available. So, not sure where I'm going to put it, but I'll leave a note in the comment section and show you where this code is. Thank you, and thank you for your patience as you watched me fix the bug. I think that's a good experience for you to watch me fix a bug, and I think in the next video we'll have some much more interesting artwork. Thank you, and have a great day.